story here. You ready, Wayne? All right. We'll start there at the plot. Now, I may read a few seconds. I may not stop at each one, so just try to keep up with me this morning. And Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. The verse continues the story of 1 Samuel 18, giving the consequences of Saul's jealous rage. We may wonder why Saul would charge his servants to implement the deadly deed of killing David. The word translated servants occurs about 800 times in the Old Testament, with a broad range of applications. It applies to various levels of service to the king, not to just what we might term butlers and maids. Faithful subjects of the king were considered to be servants. Notice the progression. Saul had tried to kill David by his own hand, by stealth, by putting David in peril. The text before us represents new attempt. It would involve not Saul himself or the Philistines, but instead his son and his court. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. The author injects this important detail to remind us of Jonathan's potentially split allegiance, emphasizing Jonathan's relationship to his father. Saul ratchets up the tension with Jonathan's loyalty to his father and potentially his own future place on the throne determine his path, or would his delight in David decide Jonathan's course of action? The situation was made more problematic by the covenant between Jonathan and David. It should prevent Jonathan from obeying his father's orders to kill David in order to save his friend and honor their covenant. Jonathan would have to disobey his father, and the king could certainly punish his son any way he saw fit for such an act of rebellion. So, as background some more on this, Saul has made plots before to kill David, and they haven't worked out. But as Jonathan, he gets that the story gets us started here. It tells us, that Jonathan delighted much in David, as they were good friends, and as he's got these orders, he has to disobey something. And as we get on into it, we see that which way he chooses here, and to make the right thing. But something you have to remember is Jonathan, the son of Saul, also would be the heir to the throne. So as he makes a couple decisions here, he's got more to lose than just different things. But the good thing is that they follow God. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul, my father seeketh to kill thee. The reader doesn't wait long in suspense. Jonathan clearly chose his love for David over the devotion of it to his father, the king. The role of his son was to honor his father, which included obeying him. Compare Ephesians 6:1-3. Jonathan's informing David of Saul's pronouncement undermined his father's will. Since the Lord had rejected Saul in favor of David, the contrast highlights for the reader Saul's opposition to the will of God. It may also show Jonathan's acceptance of David's place as future king rather than himself, and thus a man who followed God's will. No doubt there was a full conversation between Jonathan and David, but only revelation of Saul's plot is recorded. Jonathan's warning consisted of 1, the report, 2, the 3 commands, and 4 actions Jonathan will take. Seeketh emphasizes Saul's very active desire to have David put to death. He was not just daydreaming. The king was coming up with plans to kill David. So as we've understood there, he's coming up with plans to kill David. And it's all on Saul's part, but it kind of, you can get a little bit of brotherly love out of there too as Jonathan goes. And Jonathan has told David more than just this time about plans and things that was going on. Now therefore I pray thee, grammatically, a request and a command appear the same, determining whether Jonathan commanded David or requested of David. As a matter of context, considering each man's status relative to the other's leads to an impasse. At the moment, Jonathan is higher status because he is the king's son and heir apparent to the throne. However, he and David both knew that David had been chosen by God to be the next king. Furthermore, a warning, though it comes as a command, can be softened by the concern of one who issues it. One can imagine that Jonathan, though apparently ordering David to do what he said, would have been open to other suggestions as long as they were intended to keep David safe from harm. So Jonathan is giving him some detailed command here, and as you think about it, and sometimes we see that nowadays when things we have different opinions, we have different options and things. There's a way to come at it, and Jonathan comes at it in a way here that he comes off easy and everything, and he gives David the plan. And sometimes we have to remember to do that, come off easy, and to come out with our plan in a way that it doesn't. Sometimes people just jump at it and we're doing this. And if you would just take the time and explain what's going on, you wouldn't even have to say we're doing this, because everybody would be saying we're doing this. So, and that's the kind of the way that Jonathan brought it to David here. Take heed to thyself until the morning. The fact that the warning, take heed, is followed by until the morning indicated that the threat was an immediate danger. This was not the kind of general take care advisory with which we end casual conversations today. Jonathan's telling him there, hey, I should be killing you right now. And David needs to make his plan and go with it. And abide in a secret place and hide thyself. These two imperatives reveal Jonathan's intention to give David an active yet passive part in the plan. The active part was for David to hide himself. The passive part was to abide. After he did so, Jonathan did not know if his attempt to convince his father not to kill David would succeed, thus this precautionary measure. Now he's telling him, take hide, go in a secret place, hide away, and Jonathan's already got his plan here. Hey, I'm going to try to talk Saul out of this. Don't kill David. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art. And I points out a shift of focus from David's task to Jonathan's. The first pair seen here describes where Jonathan would be, standing with David's sworn enemy in the field near David. Apparently the secret place where David was to hide would be secret only from Saul, not from Jonathan. Therefore, David would be completely vulnerable and trusting Jonathan not to betray him. Now, there is one time where we have David has to trust Jonathan here because Jonathan knows where David's at. He could have put everything into plan, had an army there ready, and could have got him right there in that secret place. So here's one time that David is trusting Jonathan to make sure he's going to do his job. And his job is he's going to talk to Saul and see if he can talk him out of it. And I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see that I will tell thee. Jonathan's second pair of actions describes what he planned to say. First to Saul, then to David. Once again, David would have to trust Jonathan's plan to tell him everything that he needed to know to survive. So there's again, David has to trust Jonathan once again because of what the plans they have put into place here. He has to be able to tell him how to survive. The intercession. Jonathan's intercession with Saul leads the reader to assume that David had already done what Jonathan required. Once again, Saul's position as Jonathan's father is emphasized. This brings to mind the complicated responsibility Jonathan has toward him. The expression, let not the king, in third person, is more polite than a bald command. Do not. Jonathan's address of his father as a king may be designated to calm Saul's insecurity over his kingship. We also recall the resisting kings was dangerous. In the law of Moses, before the existence of the king in Israel, disobeying priests and judges was punishable by death. the practice extended to kings in Israel, and that they had power over life and death of their subject, as did kings in the surrounding nations. However, Jonathan's address also reminded the king that he had a duty to God not to sin against others. Although might makes right, seems to have been the rule throughout history. God's people are to be different. We live by standards given by the Lord, not rules determined by people. For this reason, Saul did not have the moral authority to have David killed. That would go against God's injunctions about killing innocent people, which even the king is meant to obey, uphold. David is identified as Saul's servant. By this use of term, Jonathan describes David as a faithful member of Saul's court, just like the servants of verse 1. So as Jonathan's going to make intercession here for David now, and he has to come in again. And once again, if you remember back there in about the first or second paragraph, Jonathan has a way of coming off here. He says, let me find it here. The expression, let not the king in third person, is more polite than a bald command. As he comes out, he's a good, smooth talker. And we've seen a lot of smooth talkers and things, but sometimes that's the route we need to take, is just to present the plan in a way that we don't upset people. We just come off, a lot of times maybe just even ask, hey, what do you think about this? Even though you know that's what we're going to do, if you come to somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this? And that's, it comes out a lot better. Because he has not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee were very good. Again, not sin means David had done nothing to bring harm to Saul. In fact, David was committed to supporting the king as the anointed of the Lord, even though Saul was seeking David's life. Theward means towards you, or for your benefit. The works that have been very good refer to all the noble acts David had done in service to King Saul. These included not just military service, but also playing the harp to soothe Saul in the times of his distress. And here we learn, David has done nothing to deserve this worldly or sinned against Saul in any way. He has done what he should and followed along. For he did not put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. David had risked his own life for Saul in slaying the Philistine Goliath, though everyone else in the army had been too afraid to confront the giant. David had trusted in the Lord's protection and his intention to defeat the Philistines. Because of his faith in God, David was able to brave Goliath's threats and use his skills learned as a shepherd to defeat and kill Israel's fearsome enemy. The result the Lord had granted Israel through David was nothing less than a great salvation from an oppressive foe. The Philistines, Jonathan mentioned only the military deeds of David. Those and other victories were the cause of David's popularity, which in turn was the cause of Saul's deadly jealousy and planned to execute David for that reason, reminding Saul that David's popularity was a result of his service, so the king could not soothe the king's feelings that he had been absurd. So if you get down to the root cause of this, Saul just he was jealous of David as they went through these different situations. Saul wanted kind of what David had, but the thing David had was God. He had God behind him as he defeated the Philistine Goliath, and as he had went through all these other victories, that he had God right there with him, and they pretty much know, that he's going to rise and keep on going because he did have God with him. Thou sawest it and didst rejoice. Then Jonathan pointed out Saul's eyewitness status in reaction at the defeat of Goliath. Saul had appreciated David's service not only at that time, but also when David played the harp to comfort him in his affliction. So David, he done pretty much whatever he had to do. Whatever his job was, he done it, and he stuck with the plan. I'm sure if he had a command, he did get his commands done. Rhetorical question. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? Jonathan concluded his argument by returning to his beginning exhortation. Couching it is a rhetorical question. Such a question is designed to make a point rather than seek information. The answer here was obvious to the king. He should not slay David because then the king himself would become guilty and deserving of death. Blood refers to the life force. Thus, innocent blood refers specifically to David's manner of living. David had acted faithfully as a servant in the court of Saul. David had given Saul a cause for Saul's anger and retribution. So there, if David wouldn't have followed the rules and done what he should have done, that's where he would have a problem. Because if Saul would have had something against him that he had broken the law or not followed orders, he would have had the right to kill him. But here it shows, Jonathan's telling him, don't sin against God here. Just by killing David, he would have sinned against God. The aftermath. And I'll skip down there at the bottom of the page. The aftermath. And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Jonathan's argument had the desired effect. Hearken unto means to heed. That is both to hear and to act in accordance with what was said. Similarly, the exodus from Egypt was initiated because God not only heard but acted on the groaning of the children of Israel. Jonathan's intervention thus culminated in Saul's making a vow to David would not be put to death. Making a vow or taking an oath is equivalent to making a covenant. It is quite to Saul's credit that he relented from his own call from David's execution. Although Saul had a history of rebellion against the Lord, in this case he honored God by heeding wise counsel and choosing not to sin against David. The Lord expected the king to keep his vow. Deuteronomy 23:21-23 declares the vow must be kept, while Ecclesiastes 5:4-6 reminds the reader that breaking a vow angers the Lord by swearing that David will live. Saul bound himself to do all in his power to protect David. So Jonathan, it's worked out here, in which if you look back on the story, you know that God, I'm sure, was mixing in with this as Jonathan come at it twice. He come at it in a way that he never upset anybody. He gave David orders of what to do and how to do it. David accepted them orders and went into hiding and trusted Jonathan that he wouldn't do the wrong thing and come back on him. And now he is here and he's talked about, he's done talked Saul into making a vow here that, I won't kill David. I'm good. I'll take care of him. So as he's made this, he knows the situation that he's in. When you make a vow with God, you say, hey, God, I'm going to give $10 to the church this morning. And, you made that vow to God that, hey, I'm going to give that $10. He don't want you to break that vow. He's made a way for you to give that $10 already if he put it on your heart. And that's nothing to be talking about money. That's just a reference I thought in my head there is, any vow you make with God, it has to come true at some point. You have to bring it out, and sometimes it can't wait longer than others. Reconciliation. Now we're skipping over to the next page here, over to 7. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan then showed him all those things. And Jonathan then brought David to Saul, and he was in the presence as in times past. David emerged from his prearranged hiding place after hearing Jonathan's call. As promised, Jonathan reported to David everything that had happened. This would have included especially Saul's change of heart and his vow not to put David to death. For David to return to Saul's presence indicates that David believed Jonathan completely and no longer had any fear that Saul would try to kill him. The result of all Jonathan's efforts was that David resumed his place in Saul's court as in times past. This phrase calls back to mind how well David and Saul had worked together initially. The reader is left to wonder, in view of Saul's past behavior toward David, how long this peace would be observed. So as Jonathan's talked with Saul here, and he's talked everything over, and everything's good, Jonathan goes, gets David, brings him out, tells him everything that happens, and David is restored back to his, I guess you would kind of say, worldly status in Saul's and the king's court there, and he's back to where he was at and how things should be getting done. All right, we'll read this conclusion here and end it up here. The three characters in the story illustrate positions people find themselves in today. Saul was a person in power who was abusing his position and doing wrong toward another. David, a lower status, was the innocent victim of that wrath. Jonathan was the one who risked sharing the wrath by standing up for the victim. He cared for both the wrongdoer and the wrong as he sought to end the conflict by reconciling them. Doing wrong and suffering wrong can lead to conflict. Hurt feelings can break relationships, and communication, differences in status, such as an employer, employee, or a parent-child, can make restoring relationships difficult. The one in power finds it difficult to admit wrong. The one in lower status does not feel safe to confront the enraged offender. At these times, restoration is practically impossible without an intermediary. At various times of conflict, we may find ourselves in any of the three roles. The boss who is rankled by the exceptional skill of an employee may feel threatened, becoming bitterly jealous in the process. Perhaps such a boss will belittle the employee or make sure the promotions or raises are not offered. The boss's subordinate might be puzzled and feel wrong for trying to give the best effort. Someone who generally cares for the boss and employee and whom both parties trust may be in a position to reconcile those in conflict. Finally, it must be emphasized that Jonathan the peacemaker was not the offender's peer. Jonathan was a subordinate to Saul, both as a son and as a subject of the king. Jonathan's brave and respectful challenge of his own father and king serves a model for us in handling conflict. So as you look at this story today, we should pick out some way of handling different conflicts. It doesn't matter. Sometimes you're going to be in one of those three roles. Hopefully we're never in the role of Saul, because Saul was the one that was in the wrong this morning, as he made plans with no reason to kill David. Jonathan done an awesome job as he presented both to David and to his father Saul as he talked to him, as he brought forth his plans and his stories and things. He done it in the correct way, in a good way, and you look now at David as he's in this situation. He had to put his trust a lot into God. He put his trust into Jonathan. You look deep into David's heart. He was trusting in God that everything would be handled and in the correct way. But as we look at it this morning, we just need to pray and remember that we can be done in the right way and get things done correct. Well, thank you this morning.